Welcome to In Focus SoCal. I'm Tanya McRae. It's National Hispanic Heritage Month, a time to celebrate the history, traditions, and cultural diversity of Hispanic and Latino Americans. California has the highest total number of Hispanics of any state, with the population doubling between 2010 and 2020, according to the U.S. Census. In a few minutes, I'll sit down with Senator Alex Padilla, the first Latino to represent California in the U.S. Senate, about his work as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Serving Institutions Caucus. But first, I want to introduce you to a local artist whose life story encapsulates the spirit of this year's Hispanic Heritage Month theme, Pioneers of Change, Shaping the Future Together. Take a look. Lalo Alcaraz is an artist and award-winning editorial cartoonist. He's had a love of creating art and imagery since, well, before he was even born.
I always say that I was always drawing. I used to draw in the womb, and it was very painful for my mother.
His sense of humor is also something that's always been with him. And from an early age, if there was something he could draw on and something he could draw with, he drew art.
In kindergarten was my first published piece, which was the back cover of the Christmas program. I would get in trouble for not paying attention in class and drawing on the margins. I'm sure lots of kids go through that. But I did it with a vengeance. I did it a lot.
Lalo was born in San Diego to Mexican immigrant parents. His mother would take him across the border into Mexico for day shopping and to visit relatives. And he says that allowed him to see the world from two very different lenses. But from a young age, Lalo began experiencing anti-immigrant bias and racism.
I would get profiled all the time by the cops there, even when we were little kids riding our bikes. And my mom and I would get harassed by shoplifting cops in the stores.
When he was 13 years old, his father, who was a landscaper in San Diego, was killed in a car accident. And as the only English-speaking member of his family, Lalo was tasked with informing his father's clients of his death.
I called this one lady. I told her that my father had died, and I didn't even get a, "Oh, I'm so sorry," or anything. She basically said, "Well, do you have the number of another gardener that can come on my lawn?" And 13-year-old me cussed her out and slammed the phone down. And, that just enrages me every time I think about it, that, he was so disposable to her because he was just another Mexican gardener.
But while he was experiencing the ways that immigrants are treated as, quote, disposable in the U.S., he was also seeing the beauty of his heritage and culture when he visited Mexico.
It was a different universe, and it blew my mind to see all the civilization that Mexicans had made in Mexico City and beyond. And it was very formative also for me to see all the great art, the movies, the TV.
Lalo became an editorial cartoonist at San Diego State University, where he began drawing cartoons about injustice and the mistreatment of immigrants. He was an editorial cartoonist for the LA Weekly from 1992 to 2010. And he created the syndicated daily comic strip La Cucaracha, which has been published nationwide since 2002. He's written cartoon books and graphic novels and creates editorial cartoons for a number of English and Spanish newspapers and digital media companies. He's also won 6 Southern California Press Awards for Best Editorial Cartoons.
My work is very political, and it's very pro-immigrant because growing up I saw the way my parents were mistreated as immigrants, and I was treated the same way even though I was born in the U.S. I realized that it didn't really matter to the U.S. That I was an immigrant. It was just because I was brown. I always had a sense of injustice, I think, because of that.
Lalo combines his love for Latino, Mexican, Chicano, and American history, culture, and politics in everything he draws.
I think it's important that little kids, first-generation kids, realize that they have everything to be proud of. Their parents are immigrants. They come from another country. Wherever they're from, they should be very proud of it. Just because you're living in the U.S. doesn't mean you have to erase your identity. You should celebrate it.
Lalo is also a writer and producer for film, TV, and animation, including projects at Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Disney, Fox, and Xbox. And he was a cultural consultant on the Oscar-winning animated Pixar film, Coco.
Especially when you have animation featuring brown families, it's important also that little white kids see that and go, oh, look, they're just like our family. They just are different, but they're not worse. They're not better, but they're also funny, wacky, and to see them as equals and normal and part of this big picture that we're all in.
Lalo hopes that the legacy of his artwork is to promote acceptance, inclusion, and thoughtful conversation across racial, cultural, and ethnic lines, as well as creating a sense of self-pride for Latinos, Mexicans, and Chicanos for generations to come.
I like when people come and they say, oh man, I grew up with this, with your work, or, feeling older, my grandma turned me on to your work, things like that. And it feels like if it goes generation after generation still reading my stuff, that's all I can ask for.
After the break, how California's first Latino senator is fighting to expand higher education opportunities for Latino students. You're watching In Focus SoCal. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Focus SoCal. Efforts to pass stricter immigration laws by state legislators across the country have significantly increased in the last 4 years. That's according to a new report by the League of United Latin American Citizens, the largest Latino civil rights organization in the U.S. So far this year, 233 laws that the group considers to be anti-immigrant have been proposed, up from 51 laws in 2020. Joining me now to discuss this report and other issues is Senator Alex Padilla, who serves as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee's Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety Subcommittee. So good to see you again, Senator Padilla.
Thank you. Great to be back on Spectrum.
So, Senator, what's your take on this newest report by LULAC?
Look, the facts are the facts. The numbers are the numbers. It's sad, but certainly not surprising, given just the increasing rhetoric and cruelty that we continue to hear, not just from Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for president of the United States, but the party as a whole. I mean, as soon as Trump came on the scene in 2016, certainly throughout his 4 years of the presidency, there was a tone shift amongst Republicans, and they're trying to out-fool each other when it comes to not just immigration policy, but when it comes to immigrants themselves. I think it's important for folks to understand that there's an important difference between the roles and responsibility of the federal government as it pertains to immigration, whether it's border security, whether it's collaboration with partners in Latin America and beyond. And then there's, of course, how we treat long-term immigrants that are residents of the United States, both documented and undocumented, but have been important not just to get through the pandemic, but to grow our economy. The role and responsibility of state governments is not border security. It is not immigration or foreign policy, but they can make life easier or harder for immigrants. And California is a prime example. We know it's smart when we include the immigrant population in public health policy. We know it's good for our future when we invest in education of children of immigrants, and of course provide economic opportunity and upward mobility. So that's the contrast that we're seeing across the country, and I think the numbers are clear. When we embrace the immigrants, economies thrive, communities thrive, our future is brighter, but we'll keep that in mind at the ballot box this November.
As chair of the Congressional Hispanic Serving Institutions Caucus, you've been a strong advocate for expanding educational opportunities for Latino students. Last year, you introduced the HERE Act. How would that help close the higher education achievement gap?
Yeah, no, great question. And first of all, for folks who may not be familiar with the term, a Hispanic Serving Institution, very, very different to the HBCUs that have gotten a lot of attention and support recently. An HSI is any college or university that's not 100% Hispanic student population, just 25% or more. We know that just by that threshold, we're talking universities that are also have a higher student population that are African American, that are Asian, that are Native American. They're the most diverse of our colleges and universities across California and across the country. And if you look at the demographics of the United States, you know that a generation from now, and certainly two, we will only be successful as a country, our security, our economy, if this diverse generation of young people thrives academically. They are the true leaders of tomorrow. So by investing in these universities where the kids disproportionately have challenges, like I did when I was in college, right? I was a first generation student, whether it's being able to afford tuition and books, you know, and eating the 3 times a day during those 4 years. That's what we're trying to invest in. So the HERE Act is specific to the needs that were almost unthinkable when I was in college. You know, I go to college campuses now, there's signs for the food pantry. When students are struggling, not just to prepare for their next exam, but wondering where their next meal may be coming from. They may be sleeping in their car if they can't afford housing. All the extra stressors and pressures that students deserve to not have is what we're trying to address with the HERE Act.
Your current term ends in January 2029. What are going to be the biggest areas of focus for you in the next 4+ years?
Yeah, look, there's a lot that I'm proud of.
It sounds like so far away, but I know you have a lot to do in that time.
Yeah, 4 years goes by fast. I've been in the Senate for pretty much 4 years already, and you know, proud of what I've been a part of in terms of the rebound from the COVID-19 pandemic, the historic bipartisan infrastructure bill that we're putting to great work here in California, investing in water infrastructure, transportation, the electrical grid, modernizing that, and so much more, the Inflation Reduction Act, on and on and on. Looking ahead to the next 4 years, like delivering on all those projects that have been funded when it comes to our infrastructure, because it's also been a key part of tackling climate change. We see every year the number and the size of wildfires impacting California, or the drought that we've been grappling with for the last 10 years. The atmospheric floods that have been impacting California in recent years. These are all examples of extreme weather events. Climate change is here and now, not 25, 30 years from now. Of course, codifying reproductive rights, codifying the right to vote again, so much that needs to be done, but happy to represent California and happy to work with my colleagues to continue making progress.
And lastly, Senator, is there someone in particular that you'd like to honor during Hispanic Heritage Month?
It is Hispanic Heritage Month. You know, in our family, I think we celebrate all year round. It's
as you should.
But it's the official Hispanic Heritage Month. You know, a lot of times they get asked the question. I talk about my parents because they continue to be inspired by their journey and their sacrifices. Or icons like Cesar Chavez and Ed Roybal, for example, true pioneers at their time. But I think today, this year, I'm going to focus on my friend, my colleague, my roommate in Washington, Tony Cardenas. After 28 years of public service in the state legislature, the city council in Los Angeles, and of course in Congress for the last decade or so, he's been a tremendous public servant, tremendous leader, tremendous inspiration, not just to me, but to a whole lot of people throughout Southern California and beyond. I'm going to miss him next year, but appreciate all he's done.
Senator Padilla, it's always a pleasure having you on In Focus SoCal, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was great to be with you. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month, everybody.
Still ahead on In Focus SoCal, how one app is helping to recover LA's erased Mexican history. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Focus SoCal. The Los Angeles Public Library's archives contain millions of photos spanning back to the 1850s that document all aspects of life in Southern California. And one UCLA professor partnered up with the library to illuminate Mexican history in LA and created the Picturing Mexican America app that launched earlier this year. It displays archival images of 19th century Mexican Los Angeles related to the current location of the user. Joining me now is Marissa López, professor of English and Chicana and Chicano Studies at UCLA. She studies Chicanx literature from the 19th century to the present with an emphasis on 19th century Mexican California. It's great to have you on the show, Marissa.
Thank you, Tanya. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with, what are the origins of the Picturing Mexican American app and what inspired you to create it?
Well, even if people know that California, I mean, really all of the Southwest used to be Mexico, we don't think about it that much, and we don't often have occasion to see it around us. We're not reminded of it in our daily lives. And I wanted to create something that would not just tell people about how California used to be part of Mexico, but to give them opportunities to think about it on their own terms, in their own time. And I've been really interested in this question for a long time of, what it means to know something and what it means to make knowledge. And so I was inspired to create an app, because creating an app is a way of creating knowledge collaboratively with other people. And it's not the traditional professor thing of just writing an article and publishing it and having 5 people read it.
Right. And as you mentioned, the state of California was once part of Mexico, for people who don't know that. And before becoming the 31st state in September of 1850, Los Angeles County was originally made up of 49 Mexican ranchos, or colonial land grants, made by the governments of Spain and Mexico. And you argue that there is a skewed narrative that's been told about how Mexicans lost their land. Can you talk about that?
I mean, it's part a skewed narrative, but also part we don't think about that, right? We can say that we know Los Angeles used to be Mexico, but how did it get from Mexico to being the city that we know today, right? Like, Mexicans used to own all this land, so why don't they, for the most part, anymore? Like, how did that happen? It wasn't just the passage of time or kind of the natural evolution of things. It was a deliberate process that was engineered at the highest levels of government. In most cases, in cases of most of those 49 ranchos, how the land changed hands is not a pretty story. Because after 1848, which is when the Mexican-American War ends, a series of laws were passed, national laws were passed that were both unfair and also followed unfairly. And that, and a combination of very shady business practices, meant that the 49 privately owned ranchos that used to make up Los Angeles were pretty quickly parceled and divided and sold and became the city that we know today. And that happened very fast, really over the course of 50 or 60 years.
What are some other ways that Mexican voices and culture have been erased over the years?
So many, Tanya. We only have a few minutes for this interview.
Yeah.
I've really been most interested in the built environment and how we commemorate history in public spaces, which of course is the topic that's relevant not just to Mexican Americans, but to many, many populations in the United States. But I'm really interested in how commemorating history in physical ways is also a process of erasure, and specifically in a Mexican-American context, thinking of how we designate historic places or spaces, right? I mean, a really great example of this in the Los Angeles context is, for example, Fletcher Bowen Square, which is in downtown Los Angeles, right, of course, across from the courthouse. That space has 2 historical placards on it. It's a state historic landmark for 2 reasons. One is because the Bell Union Hotel used to be there, and the other reason why is because Los Angeles's first newspaper of record was published there in that space. And so these plaques commemorate history, but commemorate like a certain part of history, right? So the plaques talk about the Star, which is Los Angeles's first paper of record, but they don't mention the fact that it also contained a Spanish language section, La Estrella, which eventually grew into the newspaper that was Los Angeles's first Spanish language newspaper, the first fully Spanish newspaper in the state of California. So commemorating history has been largely the celebration of Anglo history and the really deliberate ignoring or erasing of Mexican-American history or Mexican history. Another great example, and this is an evergreen topic that Angelino's love to talk about, is Alvarez Street,
right,
which was invented, right, in the 1930s, and has since evolved into a really important part, an economic organ driving kind of Latinx communities today, but was not actually the historic marketplace of old Mexico. Right? So there's this way in which even when we remember, that act of remembering is an act of deliberate forgetting.
Marissa, thank you for spending time with me today, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
Thank you. Same to you, Tanya.
To learn more about the app, visit picturingmexicanamerica.com. And that does it for this edition of In Focus SoCal. Tell us about what's going on in your community. You can reach us at infocussocal@charter.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.